Hey, good morning, folks. We will call our meeting to order. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki and the district. Sorry, I apologize. I thought I was in council. This is committee day. Over to you, Deputy Warden, Chair of Corporate and Residential Services.
Not a problem, Warden.
Too big a hurry.
Call to order. First things, our land acknowledgement. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are Mi'kma'ki, the district of Spaganagity, and the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. East Hants further acknowledges the 50 African Nova Scotia communities whose 400-year history have contributed to the province's culture, history, and legacies. We are all treaty people. Moving on, I'll be looking for the approval of the agenda of all subcommittees. Moved by Councillor Green, seconded by Councillor Musa. All those in favor?
Aye.
Councillor Garden Cole was waiting to speak there.
Oh. Sorry, Councillor Garden Cole. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to add an item to the agenda today.
Okay.
Do I need to make a motion for that? Okay. I'd just like to make a motion that at some point during the course of our schedule today, that we have a conversation about the construction going on in Enfield by the Magnolia.
That would be probably under infrastructure and operations.
I'll second the motion.
Okay, so it's moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Questions to call? We'll go to the vote. There it is. And the votes are in. It's passed unanimously. So we'll add that to the agenda. We'll do that just before lunch.
After the sports place.
Yeah.
Is it around bylaw enforcement? Because if so, it's in camera, and if it's not, it would be an open committee.
Well, then I guess it partially is, so yeah, it would be in camera.
Okay, so we will attempt to do this in the back end of the in-camera session that we have just before lunch. Okay. Looking for approval of the minutes of June 20th, 2023. Moved by Councillor Mitchell, second by Councillor Hebb. All those in favor? Aye. Next, moving on to new employee introductions. And who's taking this one? All right, CAO, go right ahead.
Councillors joining us this morning is Amanda Ward. Amanda is joining us as the new accounts payable accounting administrator for the municipality. Amanda lives in East Hants, and she has extensive experience in payables and accounting for local companies. So we're very excited to have her on staff. I know the warden and deputy warden met her last week in the hallway, but we wanted to make sure she met all of you here today. So we welcome Amanda, and we hope that she has a very, very long career here at East Hants.
Welcome, Amanda. And I echo the CAO's sentiments. We hope you have a long career here and you enjoy it while you're here as well. Seeing that there are no employee changes for this month and no recognitions, they'll be done in October. The next thing up on the agenda will be Sustainable Growth Fund, allocation of funds.
Talk about the Sustainable Services Growth Fund. These are new funds that the province has provided to us. Just over $1.1 million that they sent to us, and we have to decide how to spend those funds. Just going to the background here, the province sent this to us just in March of '23. These were not included in our budget for this fiscal year. They do have very specific conditions in relation to how we have to spend them. These are, the projects would be completed by March 31st, 2025, so shovel ready. The projects that support infrastructure and growth. So those are the two primary terms and conditions that we have to meet. This funding was discussed at a meeting between the CAO and directors on July the 4th. And these numbers here are what we came up with for projects in a prioritized list. That's what we're recommending to move forward with on this funding. So that's the presentation. Looking for discussion, questions on the matter.
Thank you, Wade. Anybody have any questions for the Director of Finance? Warden Rolston, you're up first.
I would move the recommended motion that the funds be used as outlined in the chart before us.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Councillor Musa.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Okay. See no further discussion? Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. Votes are in. It's passed unanimously. I guess that's it. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Next on the agenda will be the Housing Accelerator Fund. We'll have the Director of Infrastructure and the Director of Planning.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Housing Accelerator Fund is a new federal funding program, and it's really specifically designed to incentivize additional housing to be created. The program runs from summer 23 until September 2026 and targets 100,000 new permits for housing units across Canada. There are two application streams for the program. East Hants has to apply under the large urban stream because the cutoff is a population of 10,000, so we're lumped in with everybody above that number. In order for East Hants to be eligible for the incentive funding, the municipality must develop an action plan as part of our HAF application. The purpose of the action plan is to outline supply growth targets and specific initiatives to grow housing supply and speed up housing approvals. Commit to a housing supply growth target within the action plan that increases the average annual rate of growth by at least 10%. The growth rate must also exceed 1.1%. Complete a housing needs assessment report and must also adhere to the reporting requirements of the program. Documentation on the HAF has been posted to council chambers online for the information of councillors. This table is, for example, we have the East Hants numbers a little bit further on, but basically there are three components for the funding framework. There's base funding, top-up funding, and an affordable housing bonus. And they talk a lot in the program about the missing middle in housing. So the missing middle means ground-oriented housing types. So that would be garden suites, secondary suites, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, row houses, courtyard housing, low-rise apartments up to 4 stories, and everything else would be multi-units above 4 stories. So there's specific housing or funding for each of those types of housing. So as you can see in this example here, so if you had 100 units without HAF, 125 with, your net increase is 25. And so the base funding would be $20,000 a unit. A total of 500,000 there. And then for multi-unit housing, if if you had 50 units and then 75 with the HAF, so a net increase of 25. The funding again is $20,000 a unit. So and the top-up funding though, there's another $12,000 a unit. So you end up with $800,000 for those units. Multi-unit housing, again, if you had a net increase of 25, you would get the base funding. And the top-up funding's a little bit different. It would be $7,000 a unit for 675. So again, you can see there's a little more incentive for that missing middle. So in this case, with an additional 75 dwelling units, this fictional municipality would get $2 million a year. So there are 4 quarter payments, with the first payment proposed for the summer-fall 2023. The release of HAF quarter payments for 24 and 25 will be based on an assessment of whether the municipality is achieving milestones for implementing the initiatives committed to an action plan. And a housing needs assessment report will be required as part of the documentation for the third quarter. Any funds not used to achieve the HAF initiatives outlined in the action plan can be used by East Hants Council for other initiatives outlined by CMHC. So they would include investments in housing action plans, in affordable housing itself, or investments in housing-related infrastructure. I think these last two would be more applicable to East Hants. So things like water, public transit, capacity building, site preparation. And then also the last category, investment in community-related infrastructure that supports housing, such as roads, sidewalks, fire halls, landscaping, and so on. So as part of the HAF program application, municipalities are required to create and submit an HAF action plan, and the action plan has 3 components. It must align with program objectives and supported priorities. It should reflect best practices in urban planning and will be included in the contribution agreement. CMHC is looking for municipalities to create 7 initiatives for the large and/or urban stream, and these initiatives can come from the list of initiatives provided in the HAF documentation, or East Hants can develop our own initiatives. Staff have worked together to determine those key initiatives for East Hants that will increase the housing supply. Each of these initiatives has to be completed by September 2026. These initiatives are part of the municipality's current capital plan. And note the project budgets for each initiative are subject to change. HAF revenue is dependent on the initiatives that are selected by CMHC and on East Hants' ability to complete the initiatives in the timelines outlined by the HAF program. So at this point, I'm going to hand it off to Jesse to actually go through the initiatives that we put in.
Thank you. Through you, Deputy Warden. The first one's actually one of the requirements of escalating development is going to be to processing applications and on-site inspections and enabling that. So to do that, we've added 2 building inspector hires. One of them is really the inspector we've already hired. And then it would be an additional +1 is what we're applying for. The other projects are capital-based. The number 2 through 4, so the Lance wastewater force main upgrade is a perfect example for this application because we just had to cancel it due to cost. So this is the spirit of this application, and that area for wastewater is the catchment for all of where Armco is. And so to enable that kind of developer to escalate their plans, we need to be able to escalate our plans. We'll still get it done over time, but doing it at an accelerated rate, we need money, we need support. We can't keep up with those expectations without something like that. And those 3 projects are all tied into the same wastewater catchment area. So the Lance Lagoon land purchase for expansion. We're just setting up the tone for the same area. An easement we need for along Elmsdale. It's between Elmsdale Road and Lance Lagoon. So that's an easement area for another project that we need to complete that we started. We did half of it down the 214 a few years ago. We need to do the next half, and we need to establish those easements. So the next one is a lift station upgrade for Highway 277, and that's the big catalyst. That's one of our largest lift stations, and ultimately it will be our largest. It's the major checkpoint on the regional wastewater system. Having that fully upgraded a lot sooner than planned would be beneficial to accelerating growth. The next two projects are focused on this side of the Highway 102, enabling accelerated growth timelines for this side of the highway, Industrial Way Lift Station, and the active transportation Phase 4 routing. Yeah. So where we're looking to, that's the nice part about this funding application. It doesn't, if we got funding from somewhere else, there's no conflict. You can double dip, if you will. You can, but pulling that forward, it'll enable, so something like an active transportation route makes a community more desirable, makes developers want to come and build here more. That's the focus and lens that we're putting into the application. So that's why that's grouped together. And the lift station, of course, is the critical sewer choke point on this side of the highway to get it to across. Industrial lift station is everything. We have the lift station, the old Horn Settlement Road. So where we're seeking growth or escalation or enabling growth on that is the build out of the units on Bakery Lane. We're tying that development and showcasing that development. There's a concept, there's layouts. We upgrade that, we can enable the full fast build out of that. We would be fine on a lot of these developments for the first phases, but would have to upgrade, and our whole plan was to upgrade all of these on our plan at some point, but to enable it to happen faster. So a lot of this is we're counting the units for the third building, which would have been, 6 to 8 years out potentially, but if we enable it, it can happen quicker. And then the last two are really catering developments along Enfield and Elmsdale corridor, where we're seeing lots of more apartment style housing infilling, that sort of redevelopment. So that is sidewalk renewal and widening to make that front street feel more appealable and sell Elmsdale and Enfield as a place to go live pitch in the application. So those are the projects in a nutshell, all of which they're all in the master plan regardless. It's just a expedited funding is huge for us, right? So money is the catalyst to moving anything forward, because all of this would have to take a lot longer time than a 3-year window. And staff believe we can get this done in a 3-year window if we had the money to support it. The money is the huge ask. And so an application like this is everything to enabling that.
Okay. So, within the HAF action plan, East Hants has to provide housing projects as outlined by CMHC. The total number of permitted housing units projected without HAF, and then the total number of permitted housing units projected with HAF. And this second projection is what is referred to as a housing supply growth target. The current total number of dwellings should be consistent with the East Hants 2021 census and our own building permit data. The calculation to find the total number of housing units with HAF is as follows. So housing units with HAF minus housing units without HAF gives you your incented units. So looking at the baseline for East Hants, so from 2018 to last year, so you can see the total number of dwelling units went, it's consistently going up. So 140 to 156 to 258 to 323 to 343. And we think that trend is going to continue just based on the developer interests that we see and the projects that council's approved. So the targets, again, the unit counts would be 88 single, 646 in the missing middle, 301 in the multis, for a total of 1,035. And the 3-year comparison would be a total of 560, so 88 again with the HAF, and then you add the 646 to what we think would have been built anyway, you get 1,098, and then multis 301. So the total is it's basically double what we've had in the past, and that actually at first seemed crazy to us, but when we looked at all the projects in the pipeline, it seems possible. And we actually backed it off 30%. So the next slide talks about uncertainty and capacity. So we've built out dwelling unit projections based on known development concepts within East Hants that could take place within the next 3-year window. Where there is uncertainty in the labor market that may hold up developers' intended timelines and the human factor of the municipality's ability to keep up with processing applications, that total dwelling unit max forecast by the end of the funding time allotment has been reduced by 30% on all dwelling unit counts as a factor of safety, 2% a more realistic projection with the information available at the time of the application. In terms of alternatives, East Hants may decide not to move ahead with the HAF application, and this approach is not recommended as it's a very sizable funding program open to municipalities and very unusual. Like as you've seen in the past, most of these funding programs are if you're going to do a certain capital project, you get a certain percentage of funding for that capital project. This one is simply how many housing units are created in East Hants over and above the baseline, and you get money for that. So CRS may propose an alternative initiative for the HAF action plan if you didn't like the 10 that were put in the table Jesse went through, in accordance with those CMHC objectives. So the recommendation is that the Housing Accelerator action plan is submitted to CMHC and that the CAO be authorized to enter into any contribution agreement. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, John. We have a few people here to speak. First up, Councillor Rhino.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. This plan seems to be only centralized in the quarter area. Is there any action plans or any thoughts to the 2 other areas of the municipality because we would like to encourage growth in that rural area as well as here, or in the quarter area. And I'm not speaking for Maniuniac, but I would imagine that my partners from Maniuniac would be interested in something in that area. And right now, from what you've said, I've seen nothing mentioned about either area other than the quarter area. So is there anything we can build into those plans to encourage growth in those other areas?
I'll respond through Deputy Warden. So staff did reflect on that, and we really had to come back to what this application is. And this is a reactive application. So what we had to do, instead of looking out and saying, where do we want growth? We have to respond to where is the growth already projected to happen? And where can we bundle projects that are known and we have known costs, because we didn't have time. Literally, this has gone together in the last 2 weeks. It's a fast turnaround. So for us to do strategic analysis of promoting growth in along the shore or in the Uniacs, we didn't have bricks and mortar projects in the queue with good solid numbers that we could say these are projects. We can go to our development plans and when they review our application, we can say this development application is tied to this many units, and here's the layout, here's the road layouts, here's the here's the units. We had those, so it was something that was ready to go. And like the Uniac area has high growth, but what we can do for municipal-based projects, there isn't water or sewer, which is good coverage for density, and there wasn't any, and it doesn't include and roads, and we didn't have anything concrete like a sidewalk to enable anything that was in the queue. We had talked it in the past, but we didn't bring anything new up in the plan. That was part of our strategy as staff, was to not bring any new out of the box concepts forward to shake or rattle our capital plan, and just be reactive to, hey, here's an opportunity to receive money on a plan eventually we'd be able to do anyway, and we've already discussed and already debated, versus bringing up new concepts that executive committee members have never seen and take up a lot of time, which we don't have, trying to figure out the values of each new topic. And we just thought it was too much to meet the deadline of the application, which is unfortunate for areas like the Shore or the Uniac area that would be excluded in this kind of opportunity. But as a whole is the Shore and the Uniac areas will reap the rewards of a densified tax base in the corridor that will hit the general rate, which will enable other things across the municipality long term. It's a generational move. So that can be seen as a benefit.
Well, I appreciate the answer. It seems quite a political answer, that the benefits will be seen back, filter back to those two other areas. So, I hold my breath on that one. But it just seems that these projects, these funds that are coming down are more geared to specific areas. And really, I don't see any thought going into developing. You talk about the Shore. The Shore's fine, but I'm thinking, you get a Kennecott, you get a centralized area, the kind of the hub there that is starting to build out. Why can't we be centralizing there? And even in the Maitland area, so with the proximity to the Goss Bridge and Colchester and rural, we should be looking there to try to create something that will encourage opportunity for development. So that's just my thoughts on that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Councilor Rano. And just to remind all, this is a federal program, so it's the federal regulations, and they're putting the criteria here, and the turnaround time for this is very short. So we have to have our response and our plan in by the middle of August, and we just started working on this 2 weeks ago. Go ahead, Jesse.
I forgot to add one critical conversation that staff did have, and it was around the DAR line. And so we did talk that and the concepts and that could have been the big add in the mix on this, but we're not there yet. We're not there on what is the use. We're not there on what bridge reestablishments required, who partners are with, other funding models. There was just too many unknowns, but that's where we focused that discussion. And we did have a healthy discussion on, is this possible to get something related to that in the mix? And we didn't feel that we were ready, and that's why it was left out.
Okay. Next up, Councillor Tingley.
Through the chair, for me, housing is absolutely needed. This is an opportunity to create housing twice as fast from what you say, and an opportunity for the municipality to get this funding. So I just want to move that the recommended motion go forward. The 2 points to apply for the funding and to authorize the CAO to enter the agreements.
Moved by Councillor Tingley. Seconded. There are a number of people on to speak before the motion, so leeway will be granted for them. First up, Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, so I definitely see the obvious financial benefits that this would create. So when it talks about, initiatives that remove barriers to housing supplies, so I just want to confirm that what we've already got in the line right now would be part of this.
Yeah, through you, Madam, or Mr. Chair. The housing projects that we looked at are all the ones that council has already approved. So there's no requirement to approve any additional housing, outside your normal planning process as part of this application. And that's why we specifically focused, other than the capacity building for the staff to do building inspections, it's really capital projects that are needed to allow all that housing to be built that council has already blessed, basically.
Okay, because I would be concerned about us entering into this and then in order to get the outcome that we're required to get, that we're being pushed, council's being pushed to approve things that they're not comfortable with, or, with that in the backs of our mind, and I don't like the idea of that at all. But I see that we're probably in a good position already to reach what we might need to reach, supposing that we were successful candidates in this. Okay, that's all for me right now, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. Next up, Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Councillor Rhino asked most of my question, but so part of that money can go to affordable homes. Is there any way, like, I know we're pushing back Mount Uniacke strategy for I don't know for how long, but that should have been already done, because that something like the community sewer could be something that could be used here.
Through Mr. Chair, you could, but East Hants isn't involved in housing right now. And again, we were looking for projects that we can do within the next 3 years.
Yeah.
So, and that would be a whole new discussion, I think, for council to actually participate in housing.
Through Deputy Warden, just to add to that, we did highlight in the topic there in discussions with executive committee and in council over the past year, the concept of cluster septic has been brought up as a hypothetical opportunity for densifying the Uniacke area. We're just not there. We're just not there we don't have a scope, we don't have a study, and the turnaround time to have our application in this summer, we didn't have the time to flush it out. So that it was right in there in the same kind of topic as the DAR line, except it's even less advanced in the discussions. So we did talk about how to include, or can we include or fit the Uniacke area, the shore area, and the corridor, and it was just based on timing. But we did reflect on where we were on those discussions that have come up here in executive committee.
So just one question, another question. So if someone from now till 3 years came up with development, let's say in Mount Uniacke, and for some affordable homes, can't that money be as initiative to, could we, let's say, if the province give 50,000 per unit, could we, let's say, 10,000 per unit to enhance that, to encourage people to do that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think so. I think the program would allow you to, but again, we have no internal, I guess, process for participating in housing at this point. So,
Oh, I know. I'm talking if something ever came up, would be something that we look at, or
yeah, and in all fairness, Mr. Chair, we're scrambling a little bit to understand this program, and the people that are developing it are also scrambling as they're putting it together. So there are some questions we've already asked that we're not quite sure. I think the answer to your question, though, is yes. But for example, we also asked, well, what happens if we meet 80% of our targets? Do we get 80% of our money? We assume so, but it's actually not explicitly stated that way. So there's still some uncertainty. But I think the answer to your question is you could do that.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Musa. Next up, Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the catch, we could use money like this everywhere to make improvements that would attract housing, but the catch is we have to give them numbers of how many units we think we're going to get. And realistically, the biggest bang for our buck is going to be where there are services and where more units there. You know, realistically, we're not going to get 100 new units a year in, you know, the rural areas probably. And I don't know what we could do that would meet the criteria. So this is a federal program and their criteria, it is what it is. And the due date for this application is August the 18th, I believe. So it has to be, and there's no guarantee we'll get everything we ask for. There's no guarantee we'll get anything we ask for. But I think for staff to be responsive and think outside the box a little bit and find projects that we have that could allow us to take advantage of this is a good thing. I just like to get a little bit of clarification because I'm not sure that I understand under financial considerations. No, that's not where it is. Where is it? Yes. It says any funds not used to achieve the Housing Accelerator Fund initiatives outlined in the action plan can be used by East Hants Council for other initiatives outlined by CMHC, and it's expected that all funds be spent before the final report is submitted, and so on and so forth. And then it lists some potential categories. So I'm a little unclear. Does that mean if we apply for this and we do everything we've planned to do and we have money left over, we can spend it on other things without going back to them?
Through Madam Warden, we believe so. So it leaves the door open for further debate and discussion and opportunistic. But as John mentioned, it's still interpretive because the staff members federally administrating this still are figuring it out because it was happening so rapidly. We believe, based on how it's written, it leaves the door open for further opportunities.
And that could allow some investments in the rural area and in the Mount Uniacke area if I'm, you know, if my understanding of it bears out to be correct. And there are all kinds of things that could qualify. You know, roads, sidewalks, landscape, fire halls. You know, there are a lot of things that could fall under this that could benefit from some funding should things pan out that way. But in any case, that causes me a little bit of optimism. And also, I'm just going to say, Councillor Rhino and I have sat here each for over 25 years. This is not the first time we have seen money from other levels of government made available. I think back to the gas tax for many years, that no projects outside of the serviced area qualified for many years. But we applied for every dollar we could get because every dollar we could get from the other levels of government did benefit the municipality as a whole, and it freed up money that might have had to come from the general rate that would then be available for other projects. So I guess I'm going to say we're not going to thumb our nose at it, and I fully support applying for this funding. And as we work through the process, it's going to be challenging, I think, for municipalities across the country to put together action plans that meet the criteria of the plan and get them in by the deadline. And so I think those of us who have been able to be reactive and get something together that we can back up and we can point and say, well, this many houses are slated for here, and if we do this, that, you know, that allows them to be built. There's an answer for any questions that the government might have. So kudos to staff for coming up with it. The part that outlines that, you know, if there's more money than is needed and we can spend it before the deadline, whatever we're approved, I think that's a good thing too, and that does open possibilities for other areas. So I will be supporting the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Council McPhee.
Thank you, Chair. I was just want to be sure I got the numbers straight here in your summary of action plan. So if everything, all 10 items were approved and we did all 10 items, we're looking at coming up with 15.2 million over 3 years for our own contribution.
That, Jesse, do you want to talk about the budget or? Yeah.
Through Deputy Warden, that's just the total budgeted item that are listed already in the capital plan. So in theory, the revenue exceeds the cost of the capital projects currently projected. So it would be a beneficial, if we were able to meet budget on all those projects, there would be additional funds to do additional things.
So,
It's 28 million minus 15.
yes, that's,
We have no contribution. if we
yes,
get
that's what
this
I'm
money.
saying. So we would
Correct.
actually come out ahead.
So,
Yeah.
so now to talk that is with all of these funding contributions, we won't be given a lump sum in advance.
No.
There's installments, and so you have to have the money available, pay it, and then receive stuff after the fact.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's going to be a 4 installment, and so you'd get a quarter at the start to help ramp things up, and then there's other increments. So you have to have the funds available to be able to start things, but then the cash flow starts coming in.
Right.
Is how this one works. They're all a little different, but that's how this one's set up.
Okay. And the other thing I wondered about, I know you're protecting the number of units that we would normally have, and I think you said you decreased that by 30% to give you a safety. But if we didn't reach even that number, what would the ramifications to the money? They would just cut back on the 28.6
Yeah.
million?
So again, our assumption is that it would be prorated, that whatever percent of our target we met, we would get, but we're not 100% sure about that yet.
Seems reasonable, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Mitchell.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Just a quick question, is sitting here listening to the conversation. So does this mean that the municipality is going to work more directly with developers, trying to reach the targets by the end of the day, so that we're going to encourage more development on a quicker pace, or?
Through you, Mr. Chair, no, I actually internally, I don't think we're going to do much differently than we do now. So, we're talking about expanding capacity internally so that we can meet, the demand for example, building inspection. I guess actively process applications as they come in, but and then the capital planning Jesse always does, with or without this funding, is based on that demand. So I don't think internally we're going to do anything any differently. It's just that there's this new source of funding to help us.
So we could speed up approvals, permits, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, council may get to the point, where they decide to hold off on a capital project because they have too much debt or it's too expensive, and there's not another source of funding. Well, here's another source of funding that could help with those things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Mitchell. Counselor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one quick observation, not really putting this project aside, but it just brings forth the concern about the rural areas, about Mount Uniacke and the rural areas. And when we talk about we're not there yet, or, we haven't really, hammered it out how we are going to get development in those areas, I think we should be prioritizing that. I think that, those conversations about cluster septic, those people came and made a presentation, and, that was really encouraging to the Mount Uniacke counselors and anyone else who would benefit from that. And I think that we should be prioritizing what we can do in those rural areas in order to make some development happen. It's not going to look like the development that we are experiencing here, but they should be able to have their own development happening. And I think we should be putting some time into that, not just putting it on the back burner. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Garden Cole. Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Well, I just wanted to comment that this is a different type of funding, I think, than we've ever seen before, because it's not tied to the budgeted cost of a project. And prior streams of funding that we apply for from other levels, we put a budget out, and the federal government would provide 33% perhaps, and the province 33%, and we would pick up the other 33%. And then if the budget for the project changed and the cost went up, we were still only getting 66% of the original estimate from the other levels of government. This is not like that. This has nothing to do with the budgeted cost of the projects. this funding stream just takes the number of units that you're going to create and multiplies it by dollars, depending on what the unit is and what it qualifies for. And that's why that under current budgets, you see a number there that if we were to go out today and do all these things, the numbers in the budget are just over $15 million. Might come in at higher than that, probably won't come in at lower, but that's the budgeted dollars that we think it would cost right now. That doesn't matter to this stream. By using the same number of units that are in the capital plan that this budget will support developing, and by increasing the timeline for these to be able to be created, we could gain over $28 million. And under the wording that has been supplied, it appears that if we get the $28 million, any excess, and in a best case scenario, around $13 million, could be spent on any projects in this municipality that meet those categories there. And there are things in there: roads, sidewalks, fire halls, community infrastructure. There are things there that, you know, could certainly be looked at across the municipality. So I think this is kind of a different approach than I've ever seen, and I suspect that staff has ever seen before. I don't think it's going to become the new norm at all, but if this stands up and we're able to get a piece of that pie, we stand to benefit from those projects that are outlined that allow us to apply for the maximum amount of funding, while other projects that we may not have the numbers of houses that would be created in order to put them forward as a project could still benefit as long as they meet the criteria under CMHC guidelines. So I see this as a win-win. And, you know, at the end of the day, maybe we'll be approved for half of it or all of it, or, you know, whatever we're approved for. And we all have had experience here. We do due diligence, we go out, we budget the best as we can. We all know what today's market is like. And we don't have the risk, even under this project, of all of a sudden getting less. And this is, you know, this would be 100% funded. We don't have to come up with anything. So, you know, I think to have been able to put this report together and apply for this funding, we've got nothing to lose and everything to gain. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So councillors, I'm not going to repeat everything that's been said. This is very specific for a very specific funding program. What I'm hearing around the room is talk about, you know, how do we grow outside of the serviced area, and what does that look like, and what kind of projects can we put forward? We would really need some direction from council on what it is you want us to specifically look at, because there's lots of opportunity for growth in other areas, but it does come with significant investment, and how that investment happens and how the planning rules and regulations around that investment happens, you know, isn't just a turn a switch tomorrow and it's happening. So those are sort of that long-term vision that we talked about in our strategic plan. So not getting into the details today, but if you want us to look at something specific in a study of some kind for Mount Uniacke, for example, or for areas like Maitland or Kennecott, or, you know, I think we can, with the direction of council, and perhaps on council night, we can have some direction that we would come back to council with sort of what that looks like for different areas of the municipality, and what kind of studies we need to do and whatnot to make that happen. Because right now we don't have anything on the book specifically to say we're going to do this study for this area, or you know, we're doing some incremental studies that sort of paint the picture, but that full servicing study, for example, for Mount Uniacke. That was, it was a report that was done by Dalhousie students. It's not something that we commissioned as a municipality to have a study done. So if that's something that we want to explore further, that takes resources, and we need to understand what council's commitment to that would be. Thank you.
Thank you, CAO. Just to one of your points there, I do know that a review of the Mount Uniacke GMA is on the books. It's been on the books at least for 3 years and hasn't been started yet because we've been doing the plan review. So things like the cluster septic systems and that I would expect would be brought up as possible criteria for that review. And when you're looking at the cluster septic, that it actually can hit any unserviced area of the whole municipality, not just Mount Uniacke, right? Any area where there's not services, that could be beneficial. So that is a topic, I agree, for another day. We're speaking towards this motion here for this funding, and we're going to go forward with that because we could be here all day talking about the what ifs of different programs. And on council night, I invite anybody to bring up any motions for any further reports based upon items they want to see for their area. So, let's speak. Councillor Musa.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I know the fire department in Mount Uniacke have put $100,000 toward the substations this year. And with all the growth happening in my district, they're gonna need it as soon as possible. So that could be something that we look at. And I really encourage staff to contact the fire department because they don't know where they're gonna put it now. I think we want staff to do a study where it should be and the location. And I think we have the money to do it from now till 2026 because they were talking about something next year. So that could be something, I don't know if it could be added. I know there's a lot of growth in Mount Uniacke and that should be counted toward that. Thank you.
And I think, Councillor Musa, the beauty of it is if we get the funding under this model, we'll have the funds to approach projects like that by 2026. If you look at the application, short and simple of it, the more units you can show growth in, the more competitive your application is going to be. The density of the apartment buildings and everything that are currently already planned in the major developments that are going through this area make the application more competitive. Councillor Eisner.
Working on it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this program offered to all municipalities in Nova Scotia?
The entire country.
Right. Country.
Country, yeah. It's a federal program. First come, first serve.
Is it a first come, first serve?
Well, there's a deadline. Everything, your application has to be complete and in by August 18th. So we have there's very little time to get everything together with all the criteria they've put out.
So with all this fast growth, we'll have fast costs with it too? Thank you.
Thank you. See no further discussion. Question on the motion. And the motion's passed unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the 2022-23 annual report, including the treasurer's report, consolidated financial statements. That'll be the CAO.
Oh, shoot.
Oh, there's that nice looking family.
Oh, dear. Where's Tom? Okay, that should be good. Did you switch it back over to me? There we go. Sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you, I'm very proud to present the 2022-2023 year-end report, the annual report. Before I start, I just want to thank staff and council for all the work that went into doing this report. This starts with the budget process way back in October, November 2021, and follows right through to today. So every year is sort of a cycle of lots of work, lots of energy and effort, and lots of really great thinking and decision-making by staff and council. So I appreciate everything that goes into making a year happen here. And this report is really our opportunity to showcase what has been done for the fiscal year, and sort of the treasurer's report part of this will showcase the financial position that the municipality is in, which is a very good financial position, and will showcase the investments that council is making in the future for East Hants. So I'm going to go through the report. I know we've used some of our time from the other discussion, so I'm just going to try and wrap it up in the allotted amount of time. So the report is 130 pages long. I'm not going to go through every page. I do want to hit some highlights and just sort of go through it fairly quickly, so anyone who is tuning in from home has an opportunity to know what's in the report and how they can, what they can find in there. The report will be posted on our website for the public to go and look through, and we will be doing some promotions on our social media to make sure that people are aware that it's out there. So initially, the report has several pages of sort of an introduction to the reader on who East Hants is. Not everybody who reads this report is from here. Quite often we have people who use the report that are funding partners, folks who are coming in for job applications and interviews often will use this report as preparation. And then anyone visiting our East Hants website would have opportunity to see it as well. So we talk a little bit about East Hants, sort of about our expected growth, going back to that housing report that we just had. Looking at our tourism is a huge part of what we do here. So we had 55,000 plus visitors to our 2 tourism sites last year. And we're up to over 45 parks and trails and water access points that the municipality maintains through our parks crew. So a significant outdoor play area that we have in East Hants that you as a council provide for your residents and visitors. A little bit more about East Hants, our mission and our vision from your strategic plan, talking about our 8.8% growth in the past 5 years. Those would be from the adapted census data. The first census data was incorrect, as we all know. And looking at our population of just over 25,500 people here in East Hants, including Spaganagity First Nations. If somebody wants to sort of hit the highlights of the report, between the message from the warden and the message from the CAO, you're going to get most of what sort of the very high level. The message from the warden talks about our election. It's hard to believe that Councillor McPhee's only been here less than a year already, but that was in this past year. We also talk a lot about in this document the updates you're doing to your East Hants official community plan, which is a massive public engagement sessions from this year, a massive amount of effort by our planning staff and investment of time and energy by council as well. We also have been working and continue to work on the long-term plans for the Lance and Elmsdale school sites in the corridor. So those are schools that were turned over to us by the province or the school board of the day. And council is working on sort of what the best and highest use of those 2 sites are for the community long-term. As was mentioned earlier this morning, council purchased the DAR line. That is a line that runs from Maitland through to Stanley, and there's a map of that later on in the report that I'll point out. And huge this year for the village of Shubenacadie is the Shuby Park Revitalization Project. So we've put a lot of time and investment. We had some provincial and federal funding that went into the revitalization of that park once council took ownership of that from a community group that wanted to turn that over to the municipality. So there's still a few things that have to be done on that, which we have an accessible playground spinner that hasn't been installed yet, but that part of it has arrived and we're waiting for the other part to arrive. So that will be done and we'll have an official ribbon cutting of that later this year, hopefully, once that's installed. Council also, of course, the community went through Hurricane Fiona this year. So that created a lot of energy and effort on the part of councillors and staff to help the community get through that. And we've also recognized our volunteer firefighters this year, and council added a new medal program for the fire service to add 10 and 15-year medals to that recognition program. So making sure that we have support for our fire departments is really important, and through corporate services and through our finance department, we do provide sort of a corporate support to those 13 departments. This year, we also updated the fire financial guidelines, and that was done in part with the input from the fire departments. Council has also this year added 2 new RCMP officers to our complement, and the pilot was approved to add 2 detachment assistants. I know those positions are going out to market soon, so those 2 positions will be filled very shortly. So looking at sort of the warden talks about the sort of overall strategic plan and some of those things. When you get into the message from the CAO's office, I talk more specifically about the projects that we're doing, the work that's being done by staff to move the strategic plan forward. So we talk about the construction projects. The Shuby wastewater treatment plant is very well represented throughout this document. Lots of work going on there, and we expect to have commissioning of that in January, February of 2024. That is a $9.5 million project that will essentially move Shubenacadie from a standstill for development to opening that door to allow that community to grow. They've been waiting a long time for that, so we're very excited to have that underway. And the other big construction project would be the expansion of the tanks at the Enfield Water Treatment Plant. So when that plant was constructed, there was room for 1 more tank to be installed, and that tank is being installed as we speak. Well, the project is happening as we speak, and we'll have that done this fiscal year. When we talk about planning, we do have part of your strategic plan is to plan for 2050. So this year, we've done a service capacity study for the water and wastewater in the serviced area. We've done an optimization study for the Lance Lagoon, for the sewer lagoon. I know that's exciting, but these are the things that we have to do to get through the year. So those 2 projects will inform your capital plan for the next sort of 10 to 20 years. And with the support of council, we've really moved our asset management plan along this year. And council approved the policy in November of 2022, and since then, Amy and her team have just been steaming full steam ahead, working with different departments to get sort of the data rolling under that plan. I speak a little bit about the extensive planning and development that's going on in East Hants. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. A lot of development applications processed, and the document talks about that as well. Also looking at this year, we did a diversity inclusion policy for our recreation programs that council approved. So we've worked through that, as well as adding quite a bit of programming to our recreation base. So the report talks about the different types of programming that we've added. We continue to expand our business parks, and not only expanding our business parks for economic and business development, but providing a lot of support for the local businesses for expansion and retention. And the report, I'll point out, outlines a lot of that key work that's being done. One of the more important projects, I think, for this year was the installation of 2 flagpoles on this building. Those flagpoles have enabled us to fly the Mi'kmaq Grand Council flag on a permanent basis in this building. And then we have different flags that we've been flying to be more representative of the community that we serve. And those change based on the flag policy that we put in place. So I'm grateful to my staff who have been managing that. And I'm grateful for council for enabling that to happen. I do talk a little bit about the work that we're doing internally. We did do a staff survey this year for a staff engagement survey. And that survey, there's some work to be done for sure, but that survey demonstrated that 9 out of 10 of East Hants staff are satisfied with their job here. So that tells me that the support that council has given me as CAO to provide a good culture for people to work, a good place for people to work, is working. So the other big project we have on the go is succession readiness, to make sure that all of our retirees in the next few years can be replaced with minimal disruption to service to the residents that we serve. So those are the priorities from the things that I've seen in the last year that are most worthy of note. So the report talks about municipal governance. So we have 14 policies and bylaws that council has reviewed. And as I mentioned, some of them are pretty significant. So your flag policy was a fairly significant update. Adding the PACE program, which is the program that allows folks who want to do solar and energy retrofits to their homes. Those are pretty significant projects that you've implemented. And then some were sort of, with the work that Nathan's doing, reviewing our policies and making sure that they were still in line with what this council envisions for the community. There is a page here on staff. We did have some staff who were recognized for the Queen Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medals this year, which was, again, another proud moment for East Hants to have those folks as part of our team. And we do have a team now of 77 full-time equivalent positions and then 60 casual positions at the Aquatic Center. And then we would have our seasonal positions on top of that. So as far as your strategic plan goes, the report outlines each one of your strategic goals and the objectives related to that. There's 4 pages related to your strategic plan. I've mentioned some of the ones through sustainable infrastructure already. Worthy of note is the Highway 214 project for the active transportation that is happening this summer. We've awarded some of the contracts for that and gotten funding for the others. We also have a financing plan in place to pave the gap roads, the gravel roads and the subdivisions throughout the corridor. And that project continues to have pricing coming in and whatnot. So we'll continue to work through that, with paving expected to happen this summer and fall. And here is the map that I talked about with the DAR line. So if anybody who has been hearing about the DAR line project wants to see exactly where that line goes, there is a map included in the annual report. I talked about municipal asset management and the PACE program. We did have one project out at the Waste Management Center, which was the structural assessment on the organics transfer station. And we did receive approval from Department of Environment to operate that structure without a roof, so that roof was removed. It was damaged somewhat through Hurricane Fiona, but it was already in a state of repair that that work had already been started. Under corporate excellence, so this is really how the staff team is providing value to the municipality, to council, and to the public. Very exciting. We got through asset retirement obligation this year, which is for the accounting folks who are tuning in, was a lot of work for our finance department, something that we didn't really expect to have to work through this year. But I know that we're ahead of the pack because a lot of folks are still working through trying to get that sorted out. We also looked at cybersecurity and awareness a lot this year. We also did an audit on this building for a security audit to make sure that we have a safe working spaces for our staff. We continue to work on our accessibility work. Looking at our website is probably one of the bigger things that we've done this year. So we've had a team of 4 or 5 folks working with some consultants to make sure that the new website design is accessible and that it works for providing municipal services. Our old website is, I would say the technical term is probably clunky and or non-technical term. So we have done quite a significant amount of work and training for staff on how to write for accessibility and how our documents should look for accessibility for ease of screen reading and whatnot. I did mention the engagement survey for staff. So one of the things that we dive a little bit deeper into in this section is the folks who did our survey for us. It was outsourced. They have a database of Atlantic Canadian businesses who they've asked the same 43 questions of. And East Hants scored well above average on 42 of the 43 survey questions and on par on the 43rd question. So again, I think it speaks to the culture that we have here, and it also speaks to the investment that council has made in helping us retain our staff. We did launch quite a few online tools this year that we're going to move over with our new website. Probably the most significant one would be the online reporting tool for roads and streetlights and whatnot. So I think we're getting quite a few reports through that, and it's a much more efficient way for folks to report issues, but it's also the internal piece to that is much more efficient for us to be able to track and record issues. So when you folks call me questioning why something hasn't been done or why something, is in the works, I have access to be able to, and Jesse or whoever the director is has access to be able to respond to you with details of when things came in and what we've responded to. So under Strong Community, we are always working on improving our service delivery, working with community groups to improve the services that are being offered to the community. And I think this year you've specifically seen that in a lot of the community programming that we've introduced. There's been pickleball and ball hockey, community arts programs. These are all things that have come about somewhat from community-driven and somewhat from our Pitch a Program campaign that sort of brought folks into the municipality to talk about the things that they can offer to the community. So we've really embraced that, and we're looking forward to sort of expanding that even more in the next few years with different ideas that have been brought forward through that marketing effort. Looking at some of these things I've already mentioned, the biggest one, again, that we've been working on this year is the update to the East Hants official community plan. John Woodford, our Director of Planning, and his staff have been instrumental in that. Several reports to council, several studies done, and that is all coming to fruition this month. There's going to be a public hearing next Thursday night, and that will be the last opportunity for this round of planning changes to hear public input for that. For economic prosperity, your fourth strategic goal of creating that strong commercial and residential tax assessment base that supports the community and the economic well-being of the community. We have, again, some of the things that you do sort of repeat themselves in different objectives. Some of the stuff that we're doing around growth management. We did have the Dalhousie students do a report on the servicing in Mount Uniacke with some ideas there. The capacity reports that I talked about earlier, and we are in, I would say, further than in the middle of a Mount Uniacke recreation assessment. So that is in the final stages of being completed, but it was done primarily in 2022, 2023. Council has looked at transit again, and we expect that those discussions will continue into 2023, 2024. And again, the Mount Uniacke Business Park, we sold 12 acres of commercial land this year that we brought to market, and that will in turn create millions of dollars of investment for the community. There's a number of initiatives that were done this year by Economic and Business Development, a lot of workshops, succession planning, immigration, attracting and retaining talent. Those are things that our staff are continually doing with the business community, partnering with both the province and the Chamber of Commerce to provide those for your businesses. And lots of support being given to entrepreneurs and folks who are looking to invest in East Hants. And we've had some fairly large developers, commercial projects that we've worked through. Not all of them come to fruition, but when they do, they're certainly beneficial for East Hants as a whole. So as far as municipal operations go, there's several pages in here that talk about municipal operations, just to give folks an idea of sort of the size and the magnitude of the services we deliver. I'm not going to go through all of them, but we do have some statistics on water, wastewater, solid waste, and the Waste Management Center. So those are the three things that our public generally call to ask about. Some statistics on our community planning. Again, how many projects you've looked at. Council did review 10 planning applications, some of them very large applications, and there were 7 approved. Of those 7, you're looking at about 662 new dwelling units in Elmsdale, 80 new dwelling units in Mount Uniacke, and 70 units in an assisted living facility in Enfield. So lots of good work done by council as far as reviewing those applications and preparing the community for future. Under Parks and Recreation, we do have a lot of information for folks. This is one of our most public out-facing departments. We do have, you'll see in the grant section, that we're still working through the provincial grant funds that were granted to us in March 2021, I believe. And those were for 4 very specific projects that Evan and his team continue to work through with those not-for-profit groups. So there's been money spent in the last 2 years of that, and there's still some that remains to be spent on 2 of the projects. We talked a little bit about open space. So we've received $431,000 in cash in lieu contributions, as well as some property, and we've worked through purchasing some other land in the Mount Uniacke area through that program as well. A little bit about the types of programs we've offered, what's been new in 2022, 2023, some partnerships with our First Nations neighbors. The Learn to Skate is one of them, and we've also had a lot of really great art programs that have been offered by Quentin Zilleboy to the community for Indigenous art programs, and it's so well received that we're hoping that he will continue to provide support to our community and through our programming. As you all know, Council had our volunteer awards. Becky Grant was the 2022 Model Volunteer, so we have a little showcase on that in the report. And then we talk about the aquatics program registration, different types of registration throughout the year, just some statistics for folks to hone in on. Our tourism, as I said, we had over 55,000 visitors to our tourism sites last year. Those are the ones that we've recorded. So just a tremendous asset for the community. And I know the folks who are operating businesses around those are benefiting from those 55,000 visitors. But really, if you are talking to anybody who has not been to Burncoat Head or has not been to Fundy Tidal, I would really encourage them to go. Everybody, I know my cousins were here from New Zealand and went and thought it was just spectacular. And compared to Fundy, on the other side of the Bay of Fundy, thought that Burncoat was quite something for a small park when they'd been to both on their travels. The report also talks about public safety, talking about our EMO operations. Of course, we went through Hurricane Fiona this year. And every time we do something like that happens, we do learn from that. So there's a lot of work that's being done at EMO Nova Scotia and EMO here at East Hants that really, we do learn. And everything, we have debriefs and we improve our training and we get reminded how important it is to do our training. So from that, I know Kelly and her team have built some relationships with other agencies across the province, and every time we experience something like that, we come out on the other side understanding more of what we didn't know before. So, not that we enjoy hurricanes, but we are strengthened by them. Animal control continues to be done by the SPCA for East Hants. I think one of the things that always surprises me is our compliance rate for dog tags. I think the estimate is we're about 13% of our dogs have tags, which despite our efforts to change that number, it continues to be a number that surprises me every year. The fire service, we have a page dedicated to the East Hants Fire Service here. The work that we've done with them throughout the year, and then the funding that council provides to them through $3.1 million is levies that are collected under their name with, the fire service area rates. And then we have another $77,000 that is invested in the fire departments. Some of the smaller departments receive annual operating grants. And then we also, council pays for a fire risk coordinator to help the departments with their insurance needs and any of their risk management needs that they have. And then we also have a training fund that builds up for them that they can access on an annual basis. And again, the report showcases the long-term service awards by firefighters under the Canadian Volunteer Fire Service Association Municipal Award Program. We do have a message from the RCMP in here from Staff Sergeant Corey Bushell, and we also outline how much money we have invested in RCMP services for the year. So just under $4.8 million was the total amount invested for RCMP this year. There's also a section in the report on investing in our community. So in here, we do outline the contributions to provincial services that we do. Provincial services are education, social services, correction, and regional library. These are funds that we collect on the tax bills of your residents and businesses and distribute directly back out to the province. East Hants also has a number of grants that are awarded every year. So outside of the fire department levies, this list of grants in the report is sort of a high-level overview. The Treasurer's report has a list of grants that are by individual recipient, and it's a very long list that makes up the 1.2 million. In part, that is to satisfy the need to publish a list of grants to every individual that the Municipal Government Act says we have to do. But it also gives people a sense of where the grant monies are going from the municipality and how those funds are being spent. The largest amounts here for this year would be the charitable exemptions that you give to nonprofit groups, the $323,000. Also, your district recreation funds, there was $110,000 issued, and the provincial recreation grants, those would be the grants to the groups of the money that was granted to the municipality by the province in 2021. So that's the annual report portion. The Treasurer's report, again, the Treasurer's report is intended to help simplify the consolidated financial statements. So there is, when you look through the consolidated financial statements, there's an immense amount of numbers. And not all of them make sense intuitively because it's everything that's been consolidated into one. And I'll explain that a little bit. So if you look at property assessment and property tax in East Hants, this information comes directly from our budget that council approved for this fiscal year. Again, it's sort of a reminder for those who may not have been involved in the budget process. These pages as well remind folks of what is in the budget. What is in here that council usually pays attention to is the D-transfer tax allocation by area. So this year we're looking at 2.1 million of your D-transfer tax was collected in the corridor districts, 12% or 406,000 in the rural districts, and 25% in Mount Uniacke. So pretty consistent across the board for Mount Uniacke, and then some variance from year to year between the corridor and the rural districts. These numbers will be subject of a report that'll be coming in the fall of this year. There is a motion of council to have a report on the distribution of the D-transfer tax, so that'll be coming later this year. So when we talk about consolidated reporting, your financial statements are done on a consolidated basis because that is how Public Sector Accounting Board says we have to do it. What that means is that in your consolidated financial statements, when you see a number, generally it includes all of the revenues. For example, if we focus on revenues, all of the revenues from all of these different funds that you have. So what we try and do in the Treasurer's report is to break that down between the consolidated numbers, and those tie into your financial statements, but then we have a section on the capital fund, the municipal operating fund, which you know as your general tax rate, your urban service rate, and your area rates. Then you have your water utility, which you know as sort of the water utility operating decisions you make, the capital budget for that, and then the reserve funds that we are required to have in the water utility by the Utility Review Board and by their accounting manual. And then we have our reserve funds, and you hear us talk about operating reserves, capital reserves, and restricted reserves or obligatory reserves. So this Treasurer's report tries to break that down for you, and I promise you I'm going to hit the highlights. I'm not going to go through everything. So now I've got to get my... So when you look at the consolidated variance from budget to actual, the consolidated variance this year was 5.6 million. You've already seen a lot of this information in your June memo to council on the general fund. But before you have any transfers in your general fund, your surplus was 2.5 million. And you can see a breakdown of all of that on page 68 and 69. What you've approved is 1.5 million of that to go to as transfers, and those are broken down on page 93. We also have some gain on municipal assets that we didn't and don't budget for, which be the revenue that you gain on the sale of your business park lands primarily. This year, that also includes the South Rawdon Community Hall. That building was lost due to an accident, so that has been, sorry? Center Rawdon Community Hall, sorry. And then when you dispose of your vehicles and whatnot, there's some slight gains and losses on those. Some of these are all accounting entries, so your landfill liability, your pension adjustment, those are all accounting liabilities, or entries, sorry. And the interest earned on your capital reserves is not something we budget for, but this year's fairly significant variance, and that would be due to interest rates increasing this year. Of course, the cash that you have in your reserve fund would generate interest on that. We did have I don't know if it's a donation. We are holding in trust for the Uniacke District Recreation Civic Center, $34,000. And that money is being held by the municipality and to await decisions being made by the community around what they want to have happen with recreation in their community. And then we have some minor ins and outs for variances for streetlights and local improvement projects and whatnot. We look at, first of all, the capital fund. I've talked about most of these projects. The completed projects, we do have a new sign in the Uniacke Business Park outlining sort of a directional sign. The expansion of the Uniacke Business Park, and we also completed a White Road mill and pave this year, the bottom part of White Road that didn't get done as part of the project the year before due to construction. Expected construction was completed this year as part of that revitalization project of our roads. Under work in progress, we've talked about all three of these projects, Shubie Wastewater, Enfield Water Treatment, and the Shubie River Park. Those are the three large projects that are sort of still underway with different components to be finished this coming year. In the operating fund, we do have a recorded surplus of $405,000 in the general fund. And the tables on page 67, 68, and 69 are all the ins and outs that have happened throughout the year to arrive at that surplus, including transfers that council have approved. So the biggest one, of course, is the unexpected increase over budget of deed transfer tax. That came in at 1.7 million over budget. Again, we'll be looking at a report in the fall on that. Interest on investments, tipping fees and scrap metal revenue, and aquatics, day camp, and tourism program revenues. These are all very large increases in revenue that are over budget. So council wouldn't necessarily see all of these when you get your budget variance reports on a quarterly basis. You don't always see the increases in revenue section. What you do see is the expense side of things. So if there are areas where we have gone over budget for whatever reason, then you would see those in those quarterly reports, and these would all tie into that. Again, you wouldn't see the where our expenses have decreased either. So this report gives you a good overview of that. And really, the page 69 would be sort of all of the decisions that have been made by council as to where that surplus would go or what to do with excess revenue or how to fund expenses. So Page 69 is really the decisions that you've made in June and throughout the year as you've made motions to take things from year-end surplus and whatnot. On your urban service rate, the surplus was $999. Told Janice that could easily be rounded up to 1,000, but she said no, it's $999. So about $1,000. What you'll see in your urban service rate is a significant increase in your fire protection, and that's a transfer to the area rates or to the water utility, sorry, for upgrades to the hydrant system, and that is based on a formula in the accounting manual. So based on the expenses of the water utility, the urban service rate pays that back and forth. So no huge surprises here, although it was a very busy year in the urban service rate and the water utility side. The water utility, you'll see, had much more, if I go to the next page, the water utility had a lot more over expenditures on your contracts, and you've seen all those in your quarterly reports. But that's continuing trend in the water utility is the water main breaks, the high cost of water main breaks, and the amount of water main breaks that we're having is causing us significant variances in our budgets. So the water utility had a net operating surplus this year of $146,000. Again, we did have some large expenditures. We also had some savings in expenditures to offset that. And we had some increases in revenue, one of those being that increase in the public fire protection from the urban service rate. So reserves, there is a whole section on reserves. And if you look at page 121 of the financial statements at the very back of the report, there is a whole list of what makes up this whole table of reserves. So the operating section has been sort of broken out here. The next page will talk about the capital reserves of about 12.8 million in capital reserves and about 5.6 million in your contingency reserves. So those are the things that you, open space, sewer, and water, that you collect specifically for capacity growth in your systems. Just a reminder for the newer counselors, when you look at your operating reserves, these funds, although they're called operating, can also be used for capital work. It just, by putting them in operating reserves, it gives council more flexibility on what they can and can't be used for. Once you get something into your capital reserves, which is this 12.8 million, you're very specifically setting it aside for something very specific, and council can't move that back and forth. So most of everything that's in your capital reserves is in there because regulation or legislation tells you it has to be. And that is a policy, reserve policy, that council has had for a number of years now. So your reserves are very healthy. But again, as we discussed earlier, you've got tens of millions of dollars worth of work that needs to be done in your municipality. So although we do have some fairly healthy reserves, they are necessary for continued growth of the municipality. There is a whole section on financial condition indicators. These indicators are about a year behind of the other data in this report, but we find it's important to put them in here. East Hants is in a very strong financial position. We have greens, which are good. There's green, yellow, and red. We do not have any reds. And we have one yellow, which is our debt service ratio. And, we've talked to council about our debt service ratio before. It is a ratio of your debt cost over what they call your own source revenue. So all of the revenues that you can control, be it taxes, grant in lieu of taxes, that type of thing. So when we typically increase our debt for something, it's because we're doing it to get more revenue, or it will result in more revenue. So our debt service ratio around that 10.9% is not something that the province is necessarily worried about. We do talk to them about that. They would like it to be below 10% for it to be a green. So as you can see, we're just on one side of it. But that also compares us to other rural municipalities. And as you can see when you look around East Hants, we're not the typical rural municipality. We have debt that's being generated for urban type services. So your sewer and your water, all of that feeds into your debt ratio. So again, there's lots of explanation on our FCIs in the report. There's also the investing in your community section, which is the grant discussion that I talked about earlier. So there is a list in here of every single grant that's been issued by the municipality, who it was issued to, and when you get into some of the community grants and district rec funds, there's a detailed explanation, not a detailed, but there's a high-level explanation of what the grants were issued for. So it is really neat to look at that list and see what kind of investments you're making in the community. It sort of all adds up over time, and there's some things that council doesn't actually see day to day that get awarded through your policies. So for you to be able to look back at this list and see where your community is getting some of those community grants, especially, is quite interesting once the year is over. So that's 3 or 4 pages, and then we get into the consolidated financial statements, which I promised I wasn't going to get into, and I have about 4 minutes left. So again, I thank everybody for all the work that's been put into this whole report. Aaron in our comms department put the report together and made it look pretty, but there's been so much energy and effort go into this over the last year. And I would like to recognize too that Sue Surratt, this is her last treasurer's report. She retired before the committee meeting where we get to present it, but just another recognition of Sue's work with the municipality, and 16 years of hard work and dedication, and reports like this really show the investment that she put into the finance department and making it just making us a much better place to be. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. We can open the floor for any questions, any detailed treasurer's report questions. Wade and Janice will have to jump in. But other than that, we're here for your questions.
Thank you, CAO. As you can see from that report, lots and lots of stuff have been happening in the municipality over the past year, and congratulations to staff for getting all those things done, recorded, and in progress. First up to speak, Councillor Rhino.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. It's a very comprehensive and self-explained report, one that we can share with the public. Just wondering, number one, is there going to be paper copies available? Because I'd like to disperse them out amongst the community if possible. And number two, I've had a lot of inquiries, or probably at least a half a dozen in the last month and a half, around salaries of people working in the municipality. How would, if I don't see it in this report, how would anyone obtain the salaries of people within the municipality?
So through you, Mr. Chairman, the salaries of our staff are generally something we do not share publicly. They're a contract between the municipality and the individual staff person. On page 113 of your of this report, but in your financial statements, council's legislated to have to share the amounts that have been paid to the councillors and the CAO for the municipality. So that is included in this report. The staff members below the individuals, below the CAO, are not shared publicly with people.
But are not those salaries derived from public funds?
Those salaries do derive from public funds, yes.
So I guess my question is, why then can't those salaries be open to the public?
That is a question, that is a policy question. There are other levels of government who have policies that say salaries beyond a certain level will be disclosed. There's what is commonly referred to as the Sunshine List. I know the provincial government has a Public Disclosures Act, I think it's called, that lists all of the different amounts that are paid to individuals across the province. We don't have a policy such as that, and if council wanted to develop a policy such as that, we would work on that. But right now, that's not something that I would disclose publicly. The salary ranges are disclosed when we go out to market for a position, but what one individual person earns is not something that I would share publicly without a policy of council telling me that I was expected to do that.
Well, I probably agree with you if this was a private institution or private business, but it's not. This is a open and transparent, supposedly, where taxpayers' money keeps this municipality going. And, you know, it's 6 times it's been brought up to me, and I tend to agree with them. You know, public money, they should be accountable for each and every dollar for where it goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Rano. And just to add on to that, there are many organizations, including the federal government and stuff, that only publish and only make public certain salary ranges in certain positions. So if, as the CAO said, if anybody would want something more information on that, there's always the Freedom of Information Act that anybody in the public can use to receive information. Or if there's a policy that needs to be done, then that would require a motion of council and can be brought up at a later council meeting. Any other questions? Anybody want to, do we require a motion to accept the report?
Yes.
Looking for a motion to Councilor Mitchell.
I move we accept the annual report and place it on file.
Moved and seconded. Any questions? Seeing none. Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion is passed unanimously. That brings us to the end of corporate residential services on the agenda. So I'll be looking for a motion to adjourn. The time is now 7:49 to reconvene back. 10:49 to reconvene back 10 minutes from now, say at 11 o'clock. Moved by Councilor Musa. Second by Councilor Green. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned and we will convene at 11 o'clock.
Counselor Musa, all those in favor? Contrary of mind, motion's carried. Your first order of business is familiarization tour dates. Ms. Doothright and Ms. Tapper, you'll be taking that.
All right, thank you, everyone. Good morning. We're here just to discuss a quick, hopefully, report on familiarization tour dates for council. You'll see in the report, there is money earmarked in the 2023-24 budget within the CAO's office to put on a familiarization tour. Just hang on one sec to get the report up.
My bad. Technical difficulties.
No problem.
We're good. I was I swear I got the right cord now.
There we are, and we're live. So you'll see before you the report here, which summarizes the familiarization tour that we're looking to provide to council. So as I mentioned, there is budget allocated in the CAO's operating budget. $1,800 is allocated to this project. We will get into it, but the cost will likely be slightly higher than that, between $2,325 to $4,600 and change. So I'll just get down here in the meat and potatoes. The recommendation and the recommended motion will come from the alternatives at the end for a committee to discuss. Based on discussion with the CAO, Parks, Rec, and Culture staff have created some itineraries for familiarization tours of East Hants. These would be driving tours where council would go all in a group with some of the senior leadership staff to visit a wide variety of municipal assets. A lot of these assets are sites that perhaps council and staff don't get a chance to visit as a group, much less visit on a regular basis. The intention would be to have these tours perhaps once every 4-year council term so that all councilors have an idea of what these sites look like, get some interpretation from staff who work on the ground. How many times, I'm not sure how many councilors get a chance to tour a wastewater site or tour the Waste Management Center during their tenure. So that's the spirit of this project. Given the vastness of East Hants as a region, we would break these tours up into 2 dates. So you'll see there was a draft itinerary attached to as an appendix to this report, but I'll summarize the 2 dates. Corridor and Waste Management Center would be one date where you would start at the Lloyd E. Matheson Center, visit some of the corridor sites from Enfield to Shubenacadie, including active developments, wastewater sites, parks, and the Waste Management Center, ending again at the Lloyd E. Matheson Center, starting and departing from here. And the second date with a proposed itinerary to visit the tourism sites in Mount Uniacke would start and end again at the Lloyd E. Matheson Center and take you out to the Interpretive Center in South Maitland, to Burntcoat, Walton, some other sites along the 215, and go down to Mount Uniacke and return to Elmsdale at the end of the day via Highway 14. So we have gone out and obtained quotes for transportation, and based on the availability of some of our transportation options, we would propose the following dates if council wishes to move forward with this project. Some potential dates to confirm during committee today would be for the tourism sites in Mount Uniacke, dates of Friday, September 15th or Saturday, September 16th. And the Corridor and Waste Management Center tour dates could be Friday, October 6th or Saturday, October 7th. And I'll explain a little bit why we've selected Friday or Saturday as dates. So the main cost of this project, of course, would be transportation. And we have 3 options before committee today to discuss. Coach Atlantic would be the main provider for if you wanted to go with an option where everyone's on the same vehicle all at once. So there are options there for a mini coach or a motor coach. and the costs are listed. So the more efficient option there you'll see is the mini coach with a capacity of 21 people, and that would be $3,415.15 for 2 days. That's what we were quoted. You could bump up to a motor coach for a higher fee there, as you'll see. And the other option, thinking outside the box to support local and perhaps save a little bit of money, would be to use Community Rider. They can provide you with 3 separate vans or SUVs, and Community Rider are only available to do a tour of this nature on a Friday or a Saturday. So that's why those proposed dates up there are Friday or Saturdays. And you'll see the cost breakdown for Community Rider. So that would be $2,325. That's what staff were quoted. And to wrap it up, if council doesn't wish to proceed with the tour this fall, consideration could be given to deferring the tours until the next council term. Budget could be allocated for the following fiscal year, and you could opt to defer this to the next council after the next election. There are some other alternatives there, but the main one here, number 1, is that council direct staff to book tours for the fall, and you would, in today's motion, hopefully be looking to confirm which dates and which method of transportation you would prefer. And happy to pull up the itinerary or answer any questions as needed.
Thank you for the report. First up, Councillor Wayne Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to staff and to the rest of council. I mean, we have a year left in our term. I think this would benefit a new council coming in. My own personal opinion, we've hashed this around for 15 years now, and we haven't had one yet. But I said, I think a new council coming in with new councilors, would be very beneficial. It would have been to me years ago, but it never happened. That would just be my comment. I would be prepared to move a motion to direct staff to put this off until the next new council is elected.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
I'll second.
Seconded by Deputy Warden Perry. All right, there's 3 people on before the motion. I would grant them some leeway. First up, Councillor Carl McPhee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and I can see Councillor Green's idea that waiting for a new council would be possibly a good idea, but also I'm new to the council. Although I've seen quite a few things, I think it would be good to travel with staff and the rest of council around to see these areas this fall. So my preference would be for number 1, and I guess we'd leave it up to council to preferred mode. I thought we should all be on one coach if we were going, would be my preference. And as far as Friday or Saturday, wouldn't matter to me. And I guess we could go any day as long as if we're not using the Community Rider. So those are my thoughts anyway.
Thank you, Councillor McPhee. Next up, Deputy Warden Michael Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I tend to agree with Councillor Green. And I also agree with Councillor McPhee how the benefits of this are there. However, coming into an election year, I think this plan and this stuff should be put in the budget for every new council. It should be part of the familiarization or indoctrination package that is given to councilors. So all councilors get to understand once they're on municipal council what the entire municipality is. And I think we should be putting this as a budget item that's done once every 4 years. I also think it would be beneficial to also include some staff in this trip as well. We have new staff and new people turning over into new positions, and maybe they haven't seen the whole municipality as well. So I think it's something that would benefit both certain members of staff as well as municipal council, and with only that 1 year left before redoing it, I personally find it hard justifying an expense like that where one is going to be required to be done within another 12 to 14 months afterwards for the new council. That's just all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. Warden Rolston.
Yes, thank you. Certainly agree that I think it's something that should be just done as a matter of fact with each new council. Won't be easy because every new council will have different schedules and different opinions. I did see an option here for a virtual tour to be developed. I think that's an excellent idea to do that in conjunction with whatever else we do, because then when you have new counselors come on after the tour's been done, at least there's something they can refer to. And I think if that were done perhaps sooner rather than later, I don't know what the timeline would be, but that might be something anyone interested in that's on this council could take part in. And I don't know if, having heard Councillor McPhee, it's been many years since I had a tour of any of these facilities. I have had them in the past. It's been a long time. And I just wonder, you know, is there any appetite, if perhaps not doing a formal tour like that, but if there were interest from some councillors and some members of staff, if we couldn't, you know, perhaps arrange a date and folks could, you know, carpool, bring, you know, without hiring a bus or anything like that, just set a date and get an idea how many councillors were interested and go on that day to see the things they wanted to see. I don't think it has to be a formal thing. So I will support the motion that's on the floor, but I may bring something forward afterwards to see if it's at all feasible for anyone who's interested to visit some of these sites and gain some knowledge that way. And would it have to be a motion to do the virtual tour as well? Thank you. Okay,
Is that all, Warden?
that's all for now.
Thank you, Warden. And to the motion, Councillor Hibb.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's over a year left in our term, and I know probably there's a lot of councillors, and myself included, that have not been to a lot of these places and stuff. And getting everybody together and going to a place, a lot of times questions come up that we don't think about that other councillors have. And be very informative to everybody if we were to go together and go to these places. And left on our own, sometimes we our intentions are always good to get there, but we never seem to do. So I intend to side up with Councillor McPhee. I think that's an idea that we should go and all in one bus, and that way all our questions are answered and we all get the same information. And sometimes we think we know a location, but we don't always know it. So that would be my preference. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hibb. Seeing no one left to speak, what is your wish? There's a motion on the floor to put this off to a new councillor term.
Question.
Right, the question has been called. We'll go to the vote. So one hasn't, there they are. All right, the motion has passed with a vote of 7-4. With Councillor McPhee, Councillor Hibb, Councillor Mitchell, and Councillor Tom Eisner voting nay. There we go. All right. I think there's further discussion on some issue. Warden Rolston.
I would move that staff bring us a report around creating a virtual tour of the municipality, which could be used at any time by any council. I didn't know what the cost would be or anything. I didn't know if we should have a report first or not.
Take a stab at it and see if you just want us to do it.
I'm told by the CAO that we probably don't need a report, they can just do it, so. This will be my first motion to,
Okay. So it's been moved for a virtual report
Well, if I could change the wording of my motion, because it hasn't been seconded, I would move that staff be directed to create a virtual tour of the municipality to address these sites.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Second. Seconded by who? Councillor Mitchell?
And I would also include the Rodden RCMP office in that tour.
All right, 2 people on. Before the motion was created, the leeway will be granted. CAO. I'll get you. There we go.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we can certainly work towards creating a virtual tour. I can't guarantee it'll be done in the next few months or anything, but it'll be a project for us. The other offer that I would put out there is if any counselors do want to do sort of a tour on their own with a staff member, then we can certainly do that. I will send out an email to counselors just looking for anyone who does, and we'll put together something, whether it be different times with maybe we have one of our water operators do a tour of the water treatment plant at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night or whatever it might be. We'll put together some options to get people out and about to see some of these, maybe not a complete tour. But I know I had a familiarization tour that Adam did, and it was really great. So I know he's volunteered to take anyone out individually who wants to go as well. So we can put together some impromptu things and get some information out that way in the interim. But I do anticipate we will put the money in the budget for council orientation and have that as part of every council orientation from here forth. Looking probably to give new councilors in October a few months to get their feet wet, and then do something maybe the April of 2025 it would be. So thank you.
Thank you, CAO. Councillor Michael Perry,
Thank you.
or Deputy Warden, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In support of the motion, I also think my question's kind of probably towards the CAO and the communications officer. Would we be also, as this project for the virtual tour is going on, I know we're trying to highlight our communities and do a communication plan. Could this be doubly used as part of the communication plan, maybe part of a tourism strategy? This way here, we're maximizing the project use rather than just a virtual tour for counselors and the public, but also be able to use bits of it in clips for highlighting certain areas during certain times as part of a broader communication plan and bringing East Hants together.
Is that all, Councillor?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the product that I'm thinking of for a virtual tour for council would be very different level of production than something we would put out for the public. If we absolutely could do a virtual tour of East Hants that is sort of production quality that you would want to put out to the public, that will come with some significant dollars if you wanted to go that route. It's probably well worth the investment, but it's not something we have the ability to do in-house.
Would you like to?
So what I'm interpreting the warden's motion to be is something for council use.
Deputy Warden, would you like to respond?
Yes, please. Okay, because I just looked at the bullet 5 where it says accessible staff, council, and the public. So this would be an internal virtual tour that we would really be doing. Okay, because if we're going to make it for the public and we're going to put time and effort into it, I get that the full production one is probably 4 to 5 times the length and 10 times the cost. But I was just making sure that if we are going to invest effort and a lot of time and effort into this, that it has multiple purposes. But if it's just going to be basically an introductory tour available for counselors, I'm okay with that as well. Thank you.
That's all, Deputy? Thank you. All right, seeing no one left to speak, I'd like to turn the chair over to the warden at this time. Thank you. Thank you, Warden. Just one question around that, I guess. with this motion, is there an approximated cost that, that may be attached to this? So we have some kind of idea what a virtual one would take, how much it would cost, I guess. Comparative, then we can compare that to the actual bus costs and everything else.
Yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, Madam Chairman. I guess I would need to talk to staff and get sort of their vision for what this tour looks like. When we talked about it as one of the alternatives, it wasn't to hire a production company to go and create a tour. So it would be internal costs, which are not negligible. I mean, taking staff time to do something like this takes it away from all of your other communication objectives throughout the year. So when we look at a production tour, something that's being produced, you know, for a 2-minute video, you're probably looking at $15,000 to $20,000. So I'm not in, that's why I say I'm not intending for this to be a showcasing the municipality video with production, because to do that right for each one of your facilities, you're probably looking at tens of thousands of dollars. This would be sort of an internal project that we would coordinate, sort of getting other staff members from different operational perspectives to talk on video about the facility that you're visiting or the area that you're visiting, that type of thing. So that would be the intention for this initial virtual tour.
Can you ballpark that?
I can't at the moment, no.
I guess to me then, you know, the warden's original one that, before it was seconded, was a report. So I'd like to favor a report before we rush out and do that, but that's only my opinion. Anyway, that's my part of it. Thank you. All right, seeing no one left to speak, what is your wish? Question has been called. All will go to the vote. And the vote is in, and it is passed with a vote of 10-1, with Councillor McPhee voting nay. Yeah, Warden Ralston.
Thank you. Based on the discussion and based on the fact that we know we have interest definitely of 4 councillors in some type of a tour, and there may well have been others who would have gone had it been scheduled, and hearing the CAO's comments, perhaps, you know, some staff have indicated they would be available to take councillors individually, but I would just suggest that maybe an email could be sent out to councillors, and those who were interested could respond, and we wouldn't have a bus or anything like that, but we could probably carpool anyone who was interested and have staff come with us and have a, you know, an unofficial tour or stop of the sites without perhaps doing a full-on tour this time, but I would not like to deprive anyone who is interested in seeing the things of doing it. And as Councillor McPhee said, it's always beneficial to do it, you know, in a group as opposed to on your own. And if staff are going to offer to do this, it's probably better to do it once and not 4 times or 5 times if something could be worked out. I don't know if we need a motion to do that, so I would just move that staff communicate by email with councillors, and for anyone who's interested to try and set up a joint time for those interested to visit these facilities with staff to assist.
We have a mover. Seconded by Councillor McPhee. On before the motion, Councillor Garden Cole.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I kind of struggled with whether to vote yes or no about the original motion of a tour, because I would definitely benefit from that, as would any new counselor. But I see the value in waiting until the next term when some of us might not be here. However, I would appreciate a tour of, say, the water treatment, the waste management, things that I really make decisions about that I don't know much about, to be honest. And those kinds of tours would definitely be beneficial to me. And I have work restrictions that keep me from all day outings as well. But I would benefit from tours of certain areas. Thanks.
I feel that this motion probably speaks to something like that. So-
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. Seeing no one else left to speak, what is your wish? Question has been called. We'll go to the vote. Vote is in, and it's passed unanimously. All right. Seeing no one left, we'll move on. Next order of business, East End Sports Spec, request to increase the rates. Financial variances, Mr. Tatry and Ms. Tabber, you'll be taking this.
Do you want me to bring the report up and run that?
I'll bring it up. Can I read it from here?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Or do you want to switch spots, whatever you're more comfortable? Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
All right, Mr. I'd just like to mention, Mr. Forward from the East End Sportplex is in the gallery, should we require any clarification. So who's leading? Mr. Datry. You're on, buddy. You shouldn't have touched it.
Mr. Chair. Oh, I gotta bring this up. Okay. Okay. Mr. Chair, this is about a request to increase rates at the Sportsplex. This issue came forward in June when staff provided a report on that request to council or executive at that point in time. Then it came forward again in June, general manager. Then again in June 20th, the general manager, Scott Ford, presented to the council on the rates and the East Hands Arena Association's request to increase the rates. And they were looking for a 4% on ice rentals and 3% on field rentals. So after that June 20th, or during that June 20th presentation, it was concluded that asked that the general manager come forward and work with staff to produce a report in relation to the 2018 financial statements and budget and compare to the current year, 22-23, for the purpose of bringing that report forward. So we have that report here to look at today. Before we go to the numbers, I just want to say, go to the report itself. So within this report, staff are not bringing forward a recommendation itself, whether or not to approve the rate increase or deny that rate increase. However, we do think it's important to include in whatever motion goes forward that the CEO be asked to communicate Articles 8.3 and 8.4 of the July 2021 Facility Management Agreement to the EHAA board members and general manager. And communication is to emphasize the need to soon prepare a forecast of revenue expenditures for 23-24 and take appropriate steps to increase revenue and or decrease expenditures should a deficit be forecasted. As well, it should be emphasized, any surplus in a fiscal year is to be forwarded to the East Hands to include in the East Hands Sportsplex capital reserves, capital's reserve, repairs capital reserve, capital repairs reserve, sorry. That's the report itself. I'm going to flip over to the Excel file that we have here. And I'll increase the font on that. So the report itself, as you can see, I'll make that a little bit larger. Far left is 18-19 budget, 18-19 actuals. Then the 22-23 budget, which is last fiscal year, and the 22-23 actuals. And then, of course, this current fiscal year, 23-24 budget. And then on the far right, we have the dollar changes between these numbers here, 18-19's actuals, and the 22-23 actuals. So we have the dollar figures. And then in this far column, we have the percentage change in actuals. And the exact same format is being followed here, the expenditures below. So just a few things I want to point out. The revenue, when you look at the revenue and the change in actuals between 18-19 and 22-23, you can see they've increased by 4.4%. When you look at the expenditures at that time frame, the expenditures have increased 9.9%. That's an overly simplistic view of the numbers, but as you can see, the numbers have varied quite significantly from line item to line item, whether it's revenue or expenditures. It's quite a variety of variances within both revenue and expenditures. You can see here again, within this number, interest on mortgage. Now, it was present in the numbers of East Hants at that point in time of 18-19. It was around $77,000. But you can see it's no longer in these lines for 22-23 or even the current fiscal year, and that's because now that they've been incorporated or consolidated within East Hants entity, the debt numbers itself is not a responsibility of the East Hants Arena Association. Those numbers are actually within the East Hants municipalities' records themselves, where they're paying those debt numbers currently. So when you compare those numbers, it's good to remember that that's no longer present there, and that's the variance right there. Something else I wanted to mention was while this is the budget for this 23-24 fiscal year, and this was approved by council back early 2023, and it showed a small surplus of just over $38,000 at the time. The report that I just showed you did indicate that in our discussions with the general manager, there is a CEBA loan, which relates to the pandemic funding for organizations, that does at some point in time have to be repaid in the amount of $40,000. And that $40,000 is not actually reflected within these numbers. So when you look at 23-24 and you look at the budget numbers, and then you factor in that, it's actually showing it'll actually be a very, very small deficit when you look at those numbers. That's of course assuming that all the revenues and expenditures will be the same at the end of the fiscal year, and of course they will not be. Of course, there's going to be variances no matter what. So those are kind of a summary of my observations of going through and comparing 18-19 and 22-23 and kind of looking at the numbers. Again, the recommendations, we're not coming forward as staff as a recommendation to approve or deny the increases, but we do think it's very important in the very near future that they do a forecast of revenue and expenditures and get a handle on where they are at for the current fiscal year so that they have a good 6 months or so to take action and on revenue expenditures to try to bring it into a balanced budget should that forecast project a deficit for 23-24 at this time. So having said that, Mr. Chair, we do have the general manager present here, Mr. Scott Ford. If there's questions about some of these numbers that he may be able to answer for councilors if there are any questions like that, Mr. Chair. And that's the end of my presentation for that.
Thank you, Mr. Tattery, on that. And before we proceed any further, if there is any questions, is the committee allowable to have Mr. Forward answer those appropriate questions? I see a head shaking. All right, fine. So it is allowed. All right, first up, Warden Rolston.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chart here, and on the revenue side, I see that since 1819 to this year, there's like a 76% reduction in revenue from other events. Almost 75% on the walking track, although that's not a large number. And then again, 70% reduction on revenues from other income. And I'm not sure what other income, I guess, just captures pretty well anything.
So is that a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I answer that, Mr. Chair?
Yep, just
So,
hold on, I get you here now, sir.
It was already on.
There we go. No,
You're on now.
He's on. Well, somebody touched it again. Don't touch that. So loud. Run her back here.
Presenter 2 has to be on.
You're good. Go ahead.
I'm good?
Yes, he is.
Wade wants to speak.
Wade wants to speak. Well, I thought Mr. Forward was answering this question.
Yeah, that was,
Wade.
okay. Go to Wade first. and then-
All right, I'll go to Wade first. Or excuse me, Mr. Tattery first.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
So-
hold you on hold, Mr. Forward, for
Yep.
a second.
So there was a question in relation to other income, and noticing that in 1819 it was around $66,604 versus 23-24 about $4,500. I do want to say that in that line item for the 1819 year, when I prepared this report, there was an amount of other income, which was insurance proceeds of around $57,000 in that year that I grouped in that line item of other income. And that kind of explains why you're seeing such a large variance from that year to that year. So I hope that answers your question.
Does that answer your question, Warden, or do you want to?
Oh, yeah, no, that provides the bulk of that. We certainly don't want the dome to go down again to collect
No,
insurance money
no.
to increase our other income. I guess, I just look and I see, I guess I'm just looking for other opportunities to increase revenue, because even should we approve this increase today, I mean, quite obviously, we can't be increasing the fees, to meet deficits every year. That just doesn't work. So I'm just wondering, there are various rental things and that here, but something I don't see is, and maybe it's captured within a different heading here, but is there other programming we could do for the facility to the public that would create a revenue stream? That
So would that question be directed to Mr. Forward? Warden? All right. Don't touch nothing. You put your hands in your pockets. I got you over here, okay? There you go.
We're good? Thank you, Council, for having me. Certainly, we're always looking for other revenue streams. Programming, as mentioned before, is not something that we have typically, it's not something that I've been mandated by our board to do in the past. We have discussed hiring a programmer to help with those types of opportunities. Thus far, over the last number of years, it has never been budgeted in to staff that position. One of the mandates of the Sportsplex has always been that we rent our space and our facility to organizations. I think the biggest challenge with this budget and the change in the agreement with the municipality and the Sportsplex is that we were producing a budget, the last couple of budgets we're producing almost 10, 11 months out from what a traditional peak season is. The challenge with that is most of the groups that we deal with are not-for-profit, volunteer-run organizations that do not allow us, do not give us the information on what the requirements are going to be until about 6 weeks before our peak operating season, which tend to happen in and around September. So right now, I have a significant amount of request and interest in terms of what those requirements are going to be needed by those organizations. Up to this point, it's been hard to forecast those needs 10 or 11 months out with this budget. So while I look at this revenue budget that we have in place now, I'm looking at numbers and history of what organizations have done in the past at a minimum base. So I do see some opportunity in the budget in terms of revenue without necessarily adding a significant expenditure to that budget. The challenge is to put that in a budget and be able to meet that revenue model is certainly we're at the mercy of the groups that we deal with because they're just not in a place where they do the registrations and have the ideal numbers by the time we're producing this budget. So that's probably the biggest risk in the budget from a revenue standpoint. The other side of looking at additional programming, one of the challenges that we've certainly have noticed is additional opportunities for programming create additional expenditures. And the models and ideas that we have been presented over time have traditionally not been a net gain on that programming. So, for instance, summer camps, running floor activities in our facility during non-peak season. We looked at opportunities at some other things. Dog shows would be one that would certainly was an opportunity that we went after because it was something a little bit outside our normal scope, but it was taking up, it was utilizing space when we typically wouldn't be as busy. So we're certainly looking at those opportunities, but from a programming perspective in general, there are very few programming things that we have an opportunity to actually add to our bottom line from a net revenue perspective. Most of it's a net, zero or an expenditure. It increases cost in terms of servicing the facility as well as additional staffing, not to mention additional wear and tear, and so our repair and maintenance budget would go up because of that.
Thank you. Warden, would you like to further?
As I don't want to drift into the area of responsibility of the board. It was just a curiosity question. I thought it would perhaps increase revenue and add usage of the community, community usage of the building. So I'll just move on to, and I guess I'm a pretty blunt person. Yep. And when I see over $77,000 gone from expenditures, that's kind of a sticking point for me when we've removed an expense of over $77,000. And then I would have expected that would have contributed to some type of a surplus, not a deficit of 114,000 plus. So that does concern me. I'd be lying if I said it didn't. As far as the request for the increase in the fees, no one likes to increase fees to the public. However, having said that, we do want the facility to operate and to be self-sustaining. And there has not been an increase for a number of years. I would listen to what fellow councillors had to say. I think a refusal of the increase which the board has kind of built into their budget would simply assure us we would be back here with another deficit at the end of the next time, and we don't want that. I probably could be persuaded to support that, but with the caveat that I don't think increasing the fees is the go-to answer every year to make sure the facility doesn't operate at a deficit. So I guess those are my comments. I'm trying to be mindful of not straying too far into board territory, but still expressing any concerns that I have. And so those are my comments for now.
Thank you, Warden.
May I respond, Councillor?
I didn't hear a question in that, but I'll let
sorry.
you.
I guess the only response, I guess, to Councillor Ralston or Warden Ralston's comment would be that, the board traditionally has always balked at looking at additional increases for user fees. And I think that history has kind of been shown by, this would be the first increase in 6 years that we've looked to have. And that's certainly not me. My preference would be not to raise the fees, but I'm not sure that we're in a position that we'd be able to meet the obligations of the financial agreement, or the agreement between the municipality and the operator agreement.
Thank you. Now I've got a screen full here, and please, if you could be direct questions directed to the correct person, let me know so I can put the correct microphone on. Next up, Councillor Norval Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the General Manager, Scott Forward. In the increases that you're proposing, has the carbon tax been factored in those increases for your increases maybe in heating oil, power, and propane?
No, the carbon tax has not been factored in, and the question has been asked, and I'm awaiting information on what the impact will be for the carbon tax for our facility based on the fuel consumption that I've presented.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Deputy Warden Mike Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and this might be a question for both of you, Mr. Forward, and the staff as well. If a fee increase was to be approved next year, looking at the budget time, would it automatically be reviewed to make sure that fee increase did what it needed to do? And if so, could fees then be reduced by a percentage? So say the fee increase right now is 4% and 3%. At the end of next year, maybe they didn't need 4% and 3%. Maybe the percentage needed was 2.5% and 1.5%, based upon the use and thing of the field. So currently, in your practices or in the practices, do we review the fee structure every year to ensure that it is meeting the goal?
I think probably my response for that. Certainly, it had been discussed in all our budget meetings that if there was an opportunity to reduce fees, that would certainly be something that we'd consider. I know that, as I mentioned, there is some leeway in the revenue model as it is considered at this time. What's on our display, that if we had increased revenue and increased success, I would think that the board would definitely be interested in reviewing the results of the fiscal year to look at what ways we could give back. I think the board has always been very adamant about trying to provide the best and most economical option for our clients. So I would say yes to that.
Okay, no, that's good to hear, and I don't doubt that was the model. I just needed the reassurance that these fees are reviewed and any increases are also reviewed to say whether the increase was either not sufficient enough or too much. This way here, as long as that process is done every year, I'm happy. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right. Thank you, Deputy Warden. The CAO was asked to speak with regard to your questions, so I'm going to allow it.
Through Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just to remind councillors, Section 8.3 of your facility management agreement says that the facility is expected to run at a surplus, so it's different than your own budget, where you budget status quo. The East Hants Arena Association is expected to operate this facility at a surplus. So if that means that they have to try and find places to reduce costs, they do have to come here to get fees increased. But the expectation is that that board will manage within the budget that they've set and that it will have a surplus. That surplus is essential for the municipality to then fund any capital work related to the facility. So the intention isn't that your area rate is going to make up those deficits and fund capital work. The facility has always operated in a way that it funds its own capital work, and that's still the expectation, that the Arena Association operates that way. So if there were a surplus, I just want to be clear that the rates are only part of that, that surplus also has to be put back into reserve to fund the capital work. And we do have an extensive list of capital work that has to be done based on the condition assessment of the facility that was done this spring. Thank you.
All right, the CAO responded to Deputy Warden, so I'm gonna let the Deputy Warden, if he wishes, ask a follow-up question.
So this would be probably to the Director of Finance. In looking at the requested rate increase, has the financial side of the municipality verified that that is the rate that they need to become profitable?
Kim, are you gonna take this for a response?
Through you, to Wade's point, the important part here is that the Arena Association has to be looking at their annual surplus and deficit and projections. We can't get to a point where we get to a year end and we are told that we have a $114,000 deficit. That's not the way the agreement's written. It's not the way it's intended. Section 8.4 of the agreement says that they have to be doing projections as the year goes on. So we can't answer the question whether this is going to do it or not, because there's so many variables going into the expenses and revenues in the facility and the amount of energy and effort that go into running the facility that will play into that. But the recommendation, whether you decide to increase rates or not, the recommendation is that the board is reminded of their requirements to actually manage their budget ongoing throughout the year. And that will play into, how I can't tell you whether the rates are needed or not, because part of the issue is we're not intimately involved in the operations of the facility, and you don't have control over the revenues and expenses, nor do we want to be. So we can't answer that question. Wade can't answer that question. But the board needs to be on top of it as the year goes on to make sure we don't get to the same place we were at the end of this past year.
Deputy Warden, is that?
I'm satisfied with that, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Warden. Next up, Councillor Walter Tingley.
Through the chair, to Mr. Forward, question regarding the use of the two ice surfaces and the dome. To what capacity are they being used during peak hours, and to what capacity are they being used during non-peak hours now?
Okay, so I can't give you a specific number on the non-peak hour at the moment, but if I was to give you an estimate on the non-peak hours, I would say we're probably using the facility. The last report that I would have looked at would be in the 10 to 12% during non-peak hours. And that would be on the ice surfaces. And then in the field house, we'd be looking at about 28% on the field house. During the peak hours for capacity, we're combined on the ice pads themselves, we'd be sitting probably around 86 to 87%. And one of the challenges there would be deciding on when those peak hours end. So whether they were 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night. So prior to expansion, we had rentals that would, and again, before my time, but there were rentals that happened at midnight till 1 o'clock in the morning. We don't have that situation now with two ice surfaces. In the dome during our peak season, we're at about a little over 80, I think somewhere between 88 and 89% as well.
Just a follow-up question to that. Do we have much room to, or is there opportunity to increase that usage now?
Certainly in the dome, based on the current model of organizations or clients that we use, I think there is opportunity from our October through to December timeline. The 2 weeks over Christmas is always a little bit challenging. October, the seasons have moved a little bit to one side compared to previous history. So we tend to have that winter season start more in November. So once November hits, and that's our peak season for rates, there isn't a lot of opportunity there because we are booked during our peak hours. Again, at that almost 90%. So there isn't a lot of opportunity. The opportunities that we look for then are running overnight ball events or overnight events when we can have groups come in and utilize, say, a summer sport during the winter in an indoor opportunity.
And just to comment, if we haven't had an increase at the Sportsplex for 6 years, I don't see a huge problem having an increase, although I don't look to be the Grinch that makes the increase. But I see a bigger problem here of how we do become profitable or have the surpluses. And I hear what the CAO says, and I'm on the board as representing the council there, and I would like to see something as well that is heading towards a surplus.
So certainly, if I look at conversations that I have with my peers that operate an ice surface or an ice type facility without the opportunity that we have with our dome, they certainly, I don't know right now of another facility that is not operating with a deficit in the province. And certainly, I do have a couple contacts in New Brunswick as well that they're not operating in surplus. So some of the opportunities are fundraising, which we do through our bingo. We will be returning with our golf tournament again this year and looking at those opportunities. They're just challenging situations now in terms of being relying on annual fundraising events based on the amount that every organization is trying to have to keep costs down for their organization. With the dome, our overall cost to operate the dome are substantially less than the rink. If the last analysis I did on the rink, in order to operate an ice surface and actually break even on operating an ice surface, we'd have to charge $314 plus tax just to have a break-even proposition. We're currently operating at $240 and looking for $250 per hour, tax included. So things like the bingo, things like some of those other opportunities, and certainly the dome is helping to offset those operational costs for an ice surface.
Councillor Tingley, anything further?
Just one last question, and this is pretty straight. Do you see the facility getting to the point where it's making a surplus?
I think if we don't go through some of the challenges that we've had over the last 3 or 4 years between COVID and the dome going down, we were certainly trending in that right direction. We certainly could have, there are certainly some opportunities that could present themselves. Certainly the private school that we had in our facility certainly was a huge benefit. Those daytime hours, no question, are challenging. And after school programming is another opportunity that in our community would be a real attraction, I think. The biggest challenge there is just the transportation system to have those kids have the facility accessible to them every day. So those are opportunities that I still feel strongly that would create that sustainability and the surplus income that is not necessarily taking more disposable income out of our residents' hands, but just reallocating them to a sustainable system for something that we have to offer them in our community.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you, Councillor Tingley. Okay, committee, we've reached the hour of 12:01. I assume there's a wish to finish this subject. Shake your heads if you are. Okay, very good. All right. Next up, Councillor Sandra Garden Cole.
Thank you. I just have a question. So when you say the rates haven't been increased through you to staff, or when the rates haven't been increased, so can you confirm that the rates for, say, hockey registration haven't been increased in 6 years? Is that correct?
I cannot confirm that. That's totally separate from our operating model. They run independently off the Sportsplex.
I see. Okay.
Sorry, and I apologize. I do know that they did increase last year, but that was to cover their deficit.
Okay. Just trying to get an idea of how this all works in relation to how families are impacted by rate increases, which of course they would be again. Obviously, raising rates is the last resort to try and increase revenue. And, you hope that you can increase revenue in different ways through your operational, through operations. So, yeah, it's just, I'm really hesitant to raise those rates. I feel like I don't have enough, I'm not informed enough to be making that decision, but anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Kurt. Councillor. Next up, Councillor Eli Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Scott answered one of my question. I was going to ask Elena about like the facilities around the area. Do they run with a surplus or deficit or break even?
All right, Ms. Tapper, you're going to take that?
Am I on? Good, okay. Through the chair, I don't have that information, and I think Scott had referenced that, so we don't have that kind of detailed information from other facilities. While we do have sort of information on their rates, we haven't necessarily asked that or provided it, but Scott did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The facility we're running next door, does it run with a deficit, with break even, with surplus?
So I think really you have to look at those as two very different facilities with different operations. I don't have the numbers in front of me for the aquatic center, but again, they're very, very separate entities. So while they both provide recreational activity or opportunities, I think they're sort of like comparing apples and oranges. It would be tricky to sort of consider that.
Okay, and one more question. The rate that we raise within our budget, like the 4%, would that, where does that rate go for the mortgage and the, like, I don't like to double dip the residents, right? Like, if we raise one.
I think the CAO wishes to comment on that or give some kind of explanation.
So the rate, thank you, Mr. Chairman, the rate increase that you're discussing today goes directly to the East Anse Marine Association for operating the facility. If they operate a surplus, which they're expected to under the agreement, those funds come back into the municipality to be used at that facility for capital work. The mortgage, or what we would define as a mortgage, the debt payments from when we took the facility over, the ownership of it, those are paid by the area rate. So there is an area rate that pays for the debt that we have related to the facility. So the original $3.2 million investment that council put in to build the facility, plus the money that was used to pay out the mortgage that the Arena Association had, that is also being covered by debt. That is paid for by the area rate. The rate you're discussing today would go straight to the Arena Association to manage, and depending on the results at the end of the year, some may or may not come back in to cover the capital. If you start to have a scenario where there's no money coming back in to cover the capital, then council's going to have to make some decisions on how they fund those capital projects, which would then have to be back into the area
I
rate.
understand that, yeah. So none of the 4% is going to them now? Like, it's just not going to the, so for any business for 6 years not raising their biggest revenue, I see the biggest revenue is come from rental, which is over like 60-70%. And if you don't raise those rates in 5-6 years, where everything going up 7% and 8% in just 1 year, I don't see how they're gonna continue to. So everything goes with inflation, and I think it's reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Musa. Next up, Warden Rolston.
Thank you. Well, I think that I look at it as a positive possibility. This facility historically operated with a surplus, and that's while they were paying interest and principal on their debt. And I see in 2018, that's not reflected in this table, they also paid $81,780 against the principal of their mortgage. So related to that debt, added to the $77,000 in interest, around $158,000 in money going out that they spent, and they still ended the year. They did have a small deficit in 2018 of $33,000, but we've effectively removed the $77,000, and they won't have any more balloon or principal payments to make on the mortgage. So I think that there's a positive spin here that they operated before, and I think that, they would be working towards that again. However, I do agree that at this point in time, given the deficit that has been incurred, given the situation we've just come out of, given the fact they haven't had an increase in 5 or 6 years, I don't think it's unreasonable to allow them this increase, and that's the building block to start to build towards where they were before. So I'm going to move that we approve the increases as requested.
Okay, is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councilor
And
Taylor.
that includes the instruction to the CAO as outlined in the recommendation.
All right, it's been moved by the warden, seconded by Councilor Tingley. Now, he took himself off. Oh, I was gonna say. All right, there's no one left to speak. What is your wish? Question has been called. We'll go to the vote. And that vote is to increase the rate. Still waiting for one. And the vote is in and is passed unanimously. So I thank you, Counselor, and I thank you, Mr. Forward, for your help on this. All right, peoples. Next is an in-camera session. I would hope would be your wish to move that to the end of the day. Moved and seconded, we move this to the end of the day, the in-camera session. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary of mine, motion is carried. I move to, the motion has been made to adjourn, seconder, Councilor Mitchell. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, motion's carried. Reconvene at 1:30 for Planning Advisory Committee. Thank you very much.